On the podcast today, we are going to speak about the undifferentiated consciousness that we only discover in Eastern philosophy. And this is actually different to the soul in Western religions and Western philosophy, which we will talk about. And we will explain this through the concept of Atman in Sanskrit that we find in Vedanta. And so we will have to speak about the differences first and foremost between what is the soul and what is the Atman or the undifferentiated consciousness. Now, first of all, a lot of people, when they hear undifferentiated consciousness or Atman, they associate that with the true self, right? And so a little bit of housekeeping here, because a lot of people who will read Vedic texts, or even if you get into like Buddhist texts and Taoist texts, sometimes they'll talk about the self interchangeably with being like the true self, the true nature of yourself. But the way that Atman was translated in English back hundreds of years ago was with a capital S to denote this kind of ultimate state of ourselves.
Yes.
So, and a lot of people in Western religions and philosophy, and people who are Western will say, oh, well, that's the soul, right?
Yeah.
But we will unpack that. So,
again, the concept is soul is a lot more familiar to all of us, I think, because of I guess Christian influence on the Western world and modern world, and
Korea.
Modern world in general,
Yeah.
whether that's Eastern or Western countries. So soul is the first concept when we could come up with when we talk about spirit, right?
Yeah.
Like so easily. I get that question sometimes from people. Guy, do you believe in soul?
Yeah.
And I always say, I don't necessarily believe in soul, but I believe in spirit. I just say it like this to make it a bit easier for that person, because that person might not know if I said Atman,
Yeah.
for example.
If you say Atman,
Definitely.
they'll say Adam. Who are you talking about?
Yeah.
So that's the thing, right? Like so, and this comes down to what a lot of scholars in India specifically would call Sanskrit non-translatables. So they're non-translatable to English. And see, this is, again, a problem when, especially Europeans, specifically British, went to India and started translating Vedic texts, where they would equate Brahman to God and Atman to soul, and it's not really that. And in some sense, self became a product of that. So, but if you understand self at the big S, then, and if you understand Vedic philosophy, then you will understand what we are talking about if we were using self. But we'll try to get around that today, where we'll use undifferentiated consciousness and Atman specifically. So, when we look at soul in the East, and if we used Vedanta as a template, then we have to talk about the word jiva.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, that's quite identical.
It's almost identical.
Almost identical.
Well, it is identical.
Yeah.
But the thing is that the jiva is like this, is what we accumulate through our life as our sense of self.
Like a personhood. Or as an individual, like that sort of level.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And that's composed of the Wheel of Samsara framework, which we will get into, which is composed of karma, vasanas, and samskaras, which we'll get into later. But to understand, like the jiva is the individual self, the isolated, separate sense of self, Gayang, as Jason, as everyone watching and listening.
Yes.
That sense of agency, right?
Yep.
And so the difference is that, like in Sanatana Dharma, Hinduism, is that the jiva only exists commingled with the Atman. That's why we have a term jivatman.
Yes.
And so, your jiva only exists because it's built on Atman, like...
Again, Atman being undifferentiated consciousness, which is eminent in all beings, so that jiva or soul could only exist when there is Atman. So we can call it jivatman. But again, jivatman also has that ego,
Yes.
that agency, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's something that we're trying to eradicate.
Yes. Yes. Well, that's the spiritual quest, right? Is to get rid of this jiva, or this individual sense of self that kind of gets in the way of us experiencing reality as it truly is, and being actually who we truly are, which is actually one of the defining characteristics that differentiates Eastern philosophy from Western philosophy, right? Like, because in Western philosophy, there's a big focus on individualism, hence individual soul, whereas in Eastern philosophy, it's the complete dissolution of the self, the self with the small s here, the ego, I mean, and so the jiva, and that's why it was very confusing to a lot of Europeans and British that came to India.
Yeah, so I don't think they could conceive of a concept of having a spirit which is not necessarily just belong to you, for example, because like a soul makes more sense from their school of thought, I think.
Yes.
Have an ego, strong sense of I as in constructed I, and independent and individual, that kind of idea. But yeah, Atman is... Again, we are going to talk about Brahman later, because we can't talk about Atman without mentioning Brahman, which is pure awareness that's identical to Atman in each one of us. So soul or jiva, jivatman, they all exist in this Maya, right? Maya being illusional world of separation. Yes, this or that. Like, again, you mentioned in many videos the rope and snake analogy, that we misunderstand the rope as a snake. That's, again, the world of Maya.
Yeah.
So we, again, identify ourselves jiva instead of Atman, causing all problems, right?
100%. 100%. If we only knew it was the rope.
Yeah.
If we only knew it was the rope. But we're going around saying, Jason believes this, he likes this, he dislikes this, and this is his opinion and that opinion. And that causes a fragmentation of reality and distorts the reality we experience, which, as you said, leads to conflict. That's what Maya really is, right? Like, Maya is the distortion of reality as it truly is. As we spoke about in a few podcasts back, when Shankara said, the universe... is unreal, Brahman is real, and the universe is Brahman. To explain that, when you're experiencing a reality of separation, then it's an illusion.
It's unreal.
It's unreal. And you're only experiencing it through your jiva.
Yes.
Through your soul. So, and I know a lot of people, they may get triggered about this, especially who are in Western schools of thought, but instantly, when you say you are a soul, you are separating yourself from from everything else. This is my soul's calling. Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Okay, I can see what you're saying, but like, it's more nuanced and complex than that. You're still differentiating yourself from the rest of mankind and the rest of the universe. And so the East, because in our opinion, the East goes further and deeper into contemplative thought and the nature of consciousness, they have addressed a lot of these pitfalls.
Yes.
And so you then have to unpack the nature of the jiva, the nature of the soul.
Yes. Yeah. So that's again the wheel of samsara framework. We've mentioned many times, but it's always so important to unpack that, to realize we are not the jiva. Right?
Yeah.
So what first? Karma, vasanas, and samskaras. Yes. Yeah, so karma being action or behavior or encountered action from your own action. And vasanas are latent tendencies and habitual ways that, like, you have this habitual reaction of something which is usually unconscious, right? Again, that is coming from samskaras, which is subliminal imprints. There's a mental impressions within ourselves that are dormant deep down.
Yeah. It's like the storehouse consciousness, like the basement of the house, right?
Yes, that's right.
It's like the basement. And there's a word in Buddhism, alaya vijnana. Alaya vijnana and samskaras are actually identical in the sense because they talk about a storehouse consciousness. And so, so the storehouse is like the basement of the house, vasana is like the living room, and then the yard outside where you go and play is like karma. So, and again, an important thing with karma too is unconscious actions. So those, which is obviously related to the vasanas, where someone will say something or do something and you have an unconscious reaction to it that has always been your reaction to those sorts of situations.
Again, the work here is then to catch that, right? To bring it, make it conscious.
Yes.
We have a conscious and unconscious action, but usually unconscious action often to be a problem, right? So that we need to work on to make it conscious so that we can unwrap what's causing that karma.
Exactly. Otherwise, you're just then a hostage to your vasanas and your samskaras.
Yeah, again, that wheel of samsara will never end then, right? It'll just, it keeps going and going.
And that's actually, and why we're explaining this is because that's what creates the jiva. So the jiva, the soul, is actually really the karma, the vasanas, and the samskaras, is as you said, the wheel of samsara framework.
Yes.
That's what exists life after life after life.
Right.
And so if we don't go downstairs and look in the basement at all of it, the contents of our subconscious basically.
Yeah.
And if we don't do the spiritual work to address that, that's what's going to come back life after life after life.
Yeah. That'll only reinforce this jiva, right? Only reinforce this personhood, the idea of who we think we are again.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's I find it again depends on the individual. This process can be very simple for some and easier than others, but for some people can be much more like a prolonged period of time, the work that you need to put in. And also it could be a bit tougher than others, I think. And that depends on a degree of samskaras and vasanas you have, and and also degree of how bad, of if you had any traumatic experience in when you were a child, how bad it was, or if you had a unreasonably healthy childhood, maybe it would not be as tougher as that other individual, I think. So again, it all depends on how much you want to put your sadhana into
action.
Into action, yes.
That's right. Yeah, again, traumatic experience, it is different for each and every person, right? That's why the way that we've had it explained to us from swamis and that is that, it's a very fortuitous birth to be born into a yogic family, for example. So if you're born into a yogic, but that may be based on past karma too, past lives. So your samskaras and your wheel of samsara has then gravitated energetically towards the yogic family. So you took residence in the womb, and then you come out in a yogic family, and then doing the sadhana in that life is actually a lot easier because your samskaras are not that strong.
Right.
But again, as you said, someone who has been abused or so forth and so on, it's going to be very difficult to get over a lot of the latent mental impressions.
Yes.
So, but it doesn't mean that you should use that as some sort of cop-out. You've got to get to work and you've got to do your sadhana.
Yeah.
And, to be honest, what we know from being around swamis and yogis and this and that is they can be very honest and brutal with those sort of people in some sense, where they would say, you have to get to work. And look, in all honesty, some samskaras and that may linger, especially depending on the traumatic experiences that you have experienced. But there'll be a loosening of those, and your mind will not constantly be gravitating back towards those sorts of samskaras.
Yes.
With, lengthy and a lifetime worth of sadhana, basically.
Yes, of course. Again, it takes time, but depends on what kind of attention we give it to. Like you said, if you were to just hold on to that kind of thought, the negative thoughts which are caused by traumatic experience, for example, then your spiritual work is not going to progress actually, but you just gotta give it right attention, which is you bring that into light, but you need to try to heal that wound.
Yeah.
Going through this many types of spiritual practices. Yeah.
Sometimes it's ironic because a lot of people who have had a traumatic experience will be very sincere in their sadhana. This is what I've noticed. And they will be actually sometimes more dedicated than someone probably that has had a easygoing upbringing, you know, and hasn't had, you know, a lot of problems in their lives. It's not always, you know, 100% like that, but I've seen those cases where someone's had traumatic experiences in their youth, say, and then when they're an adult, they're very sincere about their spiritual practice and their evolution in their own life. And
yeah, I think that's because to heal the wound, that's the only way. I think there is no other way. That's the salvation actually. That's why you can only be much more sincere and diligent to your sadhana. Otherwise there is no other way.
Yeah, you don't want to be flimsy about it from their perspective. You want to come into it head on. And
if you want to understand your true cause of suffering, for example, and you want to understand it, and you want to be happy and loving others and loving yourself, and then spiritual work is the only escape.
Yeah. Well, a good example of that is like the Tibetan monks during the Cultural Revolution, when, you know, Mao soldiers and that came into Tibet and started killing and slaughtering and raping, you know, the monks and the nuns and so forth. And a lot of them, obviously, because they are sincere Buddhists, and, you know, practicing up in Tibet, it's a great, on the Tibetan plateau is an amazing place for anyone's sadhana. But then after all of that experience, even though they went through all of that, they've forgiven them, you know. And so, which is, you know, it's an amazing sense of clarity that they have, you know, from years and years of spiritual practice. Does it mean that that those other people should not be held accountable? Well, we're not saying that.
Yes.
But from their perspective, they forgave them and moved on. You know, I mean, the Dalai Lama and everyone, they moved to northern India and Himachal Pradesh, you know. So, you know, there's a lot we could say about that, right? But but that's it's a good example of how we can also too forgive the people who have done us wrong in our life through extensive spiritual practice.
Yes.
Because in the end of the day, and I know this may sound eye-opening for some, but it's still only the jiva who's experienced that. Again, the Atman is unstained. Nothing can ever disturb the Atman, the undifferentiated consciousness. And this is why, especially in the Advaita Vedanta traditions and the Dattatreya traditions in India, there was a complete focus on the dissolution of the I, because once you completely eradicate that, nothing can ever leave a samskara. It's like writing on water or stepping in water. It can't leave any footprint.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the book I'm reading, written by Thich Nhat Hanh, Reconciliation. In that book, he mentions that similar story with the Tibetan monks. That this is a story when the Gautama the Buddha was alive. This, I don't know if it's real or it's a story. So himself and some disciples were living in this small village, and one of the men in the village, some reason, didn't like them very much. So this person just caught this one young lady or something, and this man killed the lady, and he buried in front of Buddha's house, and then just telling everyone in the village, saying the Buddha and his disciples had a sexual relationship with this woman and killed this woman, and they buried in front of their house. So obviously the village people start hating these people, the Buddha and
His disciples.
followers. Yes, and it's actually it's so terrible thing to do for someone who are walking on their spiritual path very sincerely and very rigorously, right? But then, obviously the disciples were very upset about the whole situation, and they were really working very hard to find who did it, right? Who was the one, put them into this big trouble. They were very angry, fell into very deep sadness. But then Gautama the Buddha said, catching that man who did that is not going to solve anything. That wound, that suffering that you feel is not going to be solved only because you're going to find the man who did it. You need to make it as a part of your work, spiritual work, and you need to forgive that man with your love and compassion that you are working on. That's the only way you can heal this situation. That's what Buddha said to his disciples. So in that story, I learned a kind of big lesson that when we go through some traumatic experience, anyone who made you suffer, give you a lot of psychological pain and this and that, you think that cause of suffering and cause of pain gets resolved and that wound is going to go away. It's not going to go away. No. That means that you just, you got cut, right? And you're just going to cover something on top and you just wait until that wound the cut to heal. Yep. It doesn't work like that. Or you just chase what cut your skin. Doesn't make any sense. No. You need to give a right treatment to heal the cut, right? Yep. So in the same way, what needs to be done in that situation is that you need to look within yourself for what kind of scar you have, what kind of wound you have, how you got hurt, why you feel painful. Because every individual experience pain different way. Feeling of pain is same to everyone, but cause of that is there's millions of different ways. Some people find it not painful, some people might find it very painful, so it's very different. So the work is on yourself. That's why, like you said, when you chase what causes the suffering and pain is what jiva is doing. Yeah. Jiva is chasing to solve that problem. And once you think that once you solve the problem, you're going to be all good. The sadness is go away. No, it's not. No. That scar is still there. Bleeding is still inside. Yep. What you really need to work on is to go back to the storehouse consciousness, and you need to really look very carefully what's in there. Yep. That's the only way to be free from the suffering.
Yeah, that's a powerful story. And it's interesting because, as you were mentioning, it's jiva is chasing jiva, not Shiva.
I like that.
That's the problem, right? Yeah. So we got jiva chasing jiva, but they're not doing, like you said, they're not diving deep and chasing Shiva or trying to reside or abide in Shiva, which is Brahman, right? So, and look, there's been many cases. That's a great example, but there's been many cases throughout history that we all know of where someone will get some sort of retribution for a past crime. Wrath can be a real problem, right? That's why it's one of the so-called 7 deadly sins, right? So a lot of people who get vengeance on someone that's done wrong by them often will have a sense like they don't feel really satisfied after it. Yeah. Even though that they may have, got their vengeance on that individual, there's actually a feeling of emptiness because it's almost still an unresolved wound. And this is why Gandhi said, an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind, right? So when we're always operating from that mentality of an eye for an eye, we miss the point, and we essentially we're doing the same thing in a roundabout way where we're not really still listening to each other, where Jiva's just chasing Jiva in this game, where we need to be chasing Shiva.
Yes, right? Exactly.
And so, again, as you pointed out, that all of these problems are still related to the jiva.
Yes.
And this is why in Eastern philosophy there's the focus on the dissolution of that mind and coming back into the Atman, or the undifferentiated consciousness, which we find in all of the traditions, even in Jainism, right, and Sankhya.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what has to be done. And so we have to essentially jump off the wheel of samsara framework. And so, as we mentioned, what actually comes back after birth is the jiva. But what we would say is more so the jivatman.
Yes.
Because the Atman is what is eternal. It was never born, it can never die. That's your real nature. And that's the nature of the universe, which is Brahman, the ultimate reality of the universe. There's the substratum which transcends reality, but is also immanent within it. And we are that. We are identical with that, but only as Atman.
Yeah.
I mean, Gayang is like a bubble on the ocean of Brahman,
Yes.
but it's not the nature of Brahman.
No.
You know,
No.
all you are doing is you're waving. You're like a wave of the ocean, and you forgot you're the ocean.
Yeah.
But you cannot be separate.
Yeah.
And so that jiva then begins to think that, I'm separate from the ocean.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm a wave, so I'm better than the ocean. I'm separate from it. And it's like, no, you're always one with the ocean. You're doing this form now, which is basically just the mind-body complex, which is the jiva and the soul, so to speak. And again, this is what differentiates between Western philosophy, right? They would say that, your soul's purpose, or your soul has this to do and this and that in this life. But Eastern philosophy takes the rug under the carpet and says, no, actually the soul that you are talking about has to dissolve to realize the nature of existence itself.
It's interesting in the West, like when a little baby is born, right? In the modern world of today, actually, that baby don't know anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we need to keep, it's empty canvas, it's clean blank canvas. Need to keep painting to fill it up, right? Through socialization and conditioning and education and things like that, right? So, and that is a right way to make a good human being, right?
Yep.
But in the East, it's completely the opposite. I mean, in traditional way, like more like a Laotian way of thinking. It's just like infant baby, on wood analogy, the same. The baby is born. The innocence the baby has itself is already perfect, right? So no need any kind of conditioning or socialization whatsoever. Just let the human being grow as it will, just like we leave a tree to grow as it will. The same.
Yeah, exactly. But we none of us are really brought up, and like I said before, it's very fortunate to be born into a yogic family or a Laotian family.
Exactly.
Most of us are born and got the chisel out, and we've got the Confucius style of carving and polishing,
not good enough in this, not good enough at that.
Exactly.
You need more of this, more of that. What we really need is none of that.
No.
None of that.
Exactly. And so the whole premise in Eastern philosophy is we need to abide as that, as the unhewn wood, as the Atman, that which is our original nature before the jiva, before the socialization project took place, right? And so obviously the East addressed this and address methods of how to do this, and so of how to be the Atman, the Atman which is Brahman.
Yes.
And it is possible.
Yes.
And so we've had all of these great sages throughout history that have achieved this. Saying achieve is kind of an interesting word, but have realized this, I should say. Anywhere from the Buddha to Ramana Maharishi, Shankara, you name it. So
any Eastern traditional spiritual knowledge is built on how to achieve this, right? How to, not to identify ourselves with jiva, but to identify with the Atman.
Yeah. Not jiva, but shiva,
yes.
Right? So, and so there's two core practices in Advaita Vedanta specifically, which is the practice of vairagya, which is renunciation and non-reaction, and viveka, which is discrimination or discernment. And so these two make up, kind of a practical template that we can pull apart the jiva
Yeah.
to expose its real nature,
Yes.
or its mortal nature, so to speak, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is very important because a lot of people who get into spiritual practice will not, some sense, they may have discrimination, they may have viveka, right? So they begin to like analyze themselves, they have a lot of self-inquiry, but they don't have a lot of vairagya. They don't have a lot of like renunciation. They're still very worldly. They're
Yes.
still engaged with a lot of things.
Yeah, I guess only because we are still, as long as we remain in society, we have to interact with society, with people at a job or at a school or whatnot. So that's, I think, it's a hard part. Although, like you mentioned, a lot of people understand that viveka aspect, the discernment between what's from Maya, what's from the self,
Yes.
self as Atman, like this.
Yes. And we don't want to, like, even though a lot of people will be in a job and this and that, we don't want to use that also as a cop-out, though, for not practicing vairagya, right? Like, because you can still be, as Zhuangzi said, like, as a genuine pretender, you can still go and play your role and dot your I's and cross your T's, but you can still have this sadhana in your life in the city, for example. It is a little bit more difficult,
Yeah.
but you and I both know from going to some of the most remote places in the world that some people will be, particularly Westerners, will be far, far away from their familiar environment and their habitat, and they still lack the ability to practice vairagya because they may still jump on their phone and see what's happening on the news and this and that. This is not vairagya.
Yeah, we see certain cafes and restaurants full of a lot of foreigners and
Yeah.
in a spiritual place for sadhana and this and that. But yeah, we see that a lot.
Yeah. We've seen people like in places like Tiruvannamalai where they're talking about American politics. And you're like,
Odd subject.
odd subject in a place. I wonder if Ramana would have spoke about that when he was alive. Of course not, because he was a perfection of vairagya.
Yes.
So that's one of the core. You have to have a real sense of dispassion towards the world.
Yeah, again, it's very difficult, but you need to practice it, like just every moment, every day. You need to kind of almost withdraw ourselves from these worldly stuff, just things that try to take your attention away from this present moment, for example. So it's a... Yeah, you mentioned in one of your videos that Shankara believed that it is hard to remain as a self, as Atman, without going through the renunciation,
Yep.
which is, I don't know, back in those days when he was alive, he meant physical renunciation, but as well as mental renunciation. And I believe, again, as we were mentioning, the foreigners gathering in certain places in a spiritual place, that mental renunciation is, again, I think, more important than physical renunciation because, again, this gives you a lot of strength to play your role in the society as well.
Yep.
From also walking on your spiritual path. This mental renunciation means that, yeah, again, like you non-reactive state of mind of whatever is happening around you, right?
Yep.
Nowadays, people having a lot of similar conversation around the world, right? But you just need to. I think this is a skill. You need to get away from that sort of conversation, or just to try to avoid, or just not giving any interest at all.
Yep.
Right? If you stop engaging in that kind of conversation, you yourself is already practicing it for yourself.
Exactly.
I think you yourself have to stop from the small things like that to something bigger.
Yes. That's a great point, love. And also, vairagya can kind of flower from viveka, right? So the practice of discrimination, of, like you said, the different, what is the Atman, how am I seeing the world, basically, right? Like, and the mental renunciation.
Yeah.
And so part and parcel with these two, and specifically with Viveka, is the practice of neti-neti, right? So neti-neti has been around since the Indus Valley, since the old rishis back in the day, right? And so neti-neti, there are two ways to take it. So there's the renunciation of even the body, like I'm not this, I'm not this. So that's, you're going further and further into being like an avadut or a jivan mukta. So someone who's completely dissolving even their sense of identification with the body, so to speak. But there's also the more important aspect is the mental renunciation. And that is where you use Viveka to discern in your mind, I'm not this, I'm not that. You know, similar to Zhuangzi's philosophy of when there's no more this and that, I see the infinite in all things.
Right.
You know, so, which is, you know, in Zhuangzian philosophy, there's the idea of Qing, which is a species-specific essence where the humans have a flaw where we constantly discriminate between this and that. Then we create likes and dislikes, and conflict arises from this fragmentation of the one whole reality. This reality is actually whole, and it's actually, in essence, it's one, but we fragment it through this jiva. It's like the prism, right? The Pink Floyd Dark Side of the Moon cover, where the one bright light is fragmented into 7 colors. And so that's actually how our consciousness is on an individualistic level, where the light of Brahman is coming through us, but it's fragmented through our jiva, through our soul, so to speak, and that's how we see the world. So then we start to discriminate between this and that. And that's why neti-neti and Viveka are so important, because you can then say, no, not this, not that. Like I'm seeing the world through rose-colored glasses. It's actually not the way it is. I'm not seeing the world as it is. Because the way the world is, all is the self, all is the Atman, right? And so when the heightened aspect of spirituality is when you see the Atman, or you sense the Atman, or feel the Atman in everyone else and everything else. Because that's all that really is. All that's interacting with you is the wave, is the bubbles of the ocean, not the actual ocean itself, the essence of it.
All the just the temporary, momentary phenomenon that is, isn't it? But again, like nowadays, people are lack of impatience, so that people just believe whatever has been said and this and that. But again, we need to be a little bit more resilient to be able to see a clear, bigger picture of it all.
Yes, that's right. And that takes a lot of spiritual work, in some sense, for a lot of people, right? But that's what's important, because if you can begin to practice neti-neti, then you can start to peel the layers back of jiva, and that allows the renunciation to be easier. Because do you see how vairagya flowers kind of from neti-neti and Viveka? Because once you keep peeling the layers back of like, no, that's how Guiyang sees the reality. You know, once you start to peel it away, then the natural renunciation is there. It's like you naturally have dispassion.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. That mental renunciation naturally flowers from having a Viveka practice, because naturally you are reading out what's truth, what's real, right? So that you don't have to try to renounce the world, or you renounce the noise. You will naturally be guided into what's real and what's everlasting.
Yeah, and that's what kind of like my point was. Like in Advaita Vedanta, Dattatreya tradition, Kashmiri Shaivism, all of those traditions that are focused on the dissolution of the self, is that's kind of vairagya. You don't have to sort of you can actively practice it for sure. You know, turning off the news is an act of vairagya. Never looking at your phone is an act of vairagya. But if you're practicing Viveka, neti-neti, then that dispassion
it kind of comes with it.
Because who is the one then who is attracted to the drama? They are becoming eradicated. It's only the jiva, right? The jiva is interested in drama, like, oh, look at this jiva and jiva fighting. Look, oh, this is great. You know, but the Atman knows everything's the self. Nothing is born, nothing can die.
Exactly.
There's no conflict, never ever happened. That's all the dance of Maya. That's all the dance of jiva.
again, when we get lost in these very momentary stories, we get spent. We spend so much energy paying attention to these things that we get exhausted very easily, right?
Yep.
Whereas if you can, remain that light was only one light instead of 7, then you actually preserve all that energy for yourself.
Exactly. And this will be your last life, because you are dissolving the jiva. You are not giving it any more oxygen so that the samskaras and the vasanas and the karma can continue to move on life after life.
Yeah.
You've cleaned the basement out, you've sold the house, you're on the road to nirvana.
Yeah, there's nothing left.
Yeah. You've left the community of Maya and you're off to moksha.
Yeah.
And so, in elaborating more on how to remain as the Atman, one of the core aspects, especially of Advaita Vedanta and in the Dattatreya tradition and Kashmiri Shaivism and so forth, but also in Taoism and Buddhism, is eventually you have to end the search. Now, and I speak a lot about this in Enlightenment Now, my book, and this can be one of the most difficult components of all spiritual practice, because we obviously are interested in advancing our spiritual practice through meditation and yoga and Tai Chi Chuan and so forth and so on. But eventually we have to expose who is the one who is chasing the enlightenment, who is the one who wants to escape the so-called jiva to experience moksha. And it's in exposing the one who is chasing that you actually come back to your original nature.
Yes.
This is what Ramana Maharishi always said: end the search. Everyone's asking him, like, what should I do? Like, what sort of yogas should I do? And he's saying, end the search. And it really, it pulls the rug out from underneath everyone's feet, right? When you say that.
Yeah, again, there is no bull in self-inquiry practice, especially, isn't it? But searching somewhat when we were all young, late teens and early 20s, we have no life experience, but we become like a wild dog, right? Just going out in the world and as if you're going to conquer everything and everyone and this and that. So that somewhat that search is, I wouldn't say very necessary, but it can happen, I think. And I think it's part of also journey as well.
Yes.
It can be necessary for some individuals. But the important part is to come to realization of the when to stop, I think.
Exactly.
You need to come to the conclusion that you need to actually end the search to actually get to the goal that you originally wanted to get to.
Yes.
Right. I think, again, actually, that was the point to having a journey. You need to have a journey to realize that you actually don't need it anymore, right? Ironically.
Yeah. Well, that's what Gautama the Buddha's story symbolizes, right? He searched for 6 years, strict sadhana, skull and bones. And what's the second noble truth? Is about searching, about seeking, craving. Yeah. And so when you're constantly seeking and you're craving, you don't ever realize.
Yes.
And so it's seeking itself that distorts the reality. And so you make a good point, because not everyone has a spiritual aptitude of Ramana Maharishi, for example, right? Who is 16, boom, he's the self. He doesn't have to go through any sort of extensive yogic training, this and that. He's the self, and his sadhana is just forever is the self. He's just abiding in Aranachala, and it's all well and good. And thankfully there has been sages like that before our time.
Yes.
But not all of us have an aptitude for that. We all sometimes need to go through sort of a lot of certain spiritual training. We need to till the soil to make it fertile for that to actually happen.
Yes.
The problem is, and this is to your point, is that people get stuck tilling the soil forever.
Yeah, that's all you do.
That's all you do.
But then you just overly tilt,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
nothing's gonna grow.
Nothing's going to grow. The soil is just like
Getting more
like sawdust. It's just,
Yeah.
So you're just constantly tilling the soil. And you and I know plenty of people like this. For example, especially in the yogic community, in the Tai Chi Chuan community, people will practice those forever, still in the search. And, from this perspective, what we're talking about today, that's kind of, you are postponing your enlightenment. You are postponing moksha, nirvana. You're attracted to just tilling the soil. You're attracting to just looking good or fancy at your particular practice. And it's wonderful to be a highly skilled yogic and Tai Chi Chuan practitioner. I'm not saying that. But if you're constantly just tilling the soil, though, that's the story between Confucius and Lao Tzu, right? Lao Tzu is laughing at Confucius because Confucius doesn't get it. And then in Confucius' story, he says, it's at 70 he finally understands. Yeah. When Lao Tzu was in his 20s, he's got his feet up, he's chewing a straw of grass, and he's just loving life, but Confucius is going to 70, strict through his own strict philosophy and practices.
Yeah, I wanted to point out that the problem is when you just tilling the soil, like you mentioned, Tai Chi Chuan practitioners and very rigorous Hatha Yoga practitioner and this and that. When you work on that aspect only for maybe too long, you're gonna pick up some bad habits, I think. We find it a lot with the Hatha yogis and also Tai Chi Chuan practitioners. They seem to have very a rigid psychology over time they built upon their practices. Because the physical practice, and when you want to achieve the result from physical practice, is you need to be very diligent, very strict like this. It can be very helpful to build a resilience and it's a discipline, right? It's important. But if it becomes too long, it takes part of your psychology. I think you will lose ability to think a bit more flexible and having open-minded and truly listening to others, so that you will pick up some bad habits. I think that's one of the bigger danger of falling into just a one strict path. Yeah,
it becomes a crutch.
Yes,
right? You're kind of handicapped, and you're postponing the actual, in air quotes, the end goal of all spiritual practice.
Exactly.
This is why in the Nidhyasana texts, so the texts that are written beyond enlightenment, so these are the texts for those who have gone past the threshold, so to speak. They all speak about you need to give up in some sense. There's actually no need for any yogas, no need for Tai Chi Chuan, no need for this and that, but you can only understand that from that enlightened perspective. So if you read the Avadutta Gita, the Ashtavakra Gita, the Mandukya Upanishad, for example, Mandukya Upanishad Kataka, then they all speak about, kind of the irony of searching and seeking for the Atman, because in reality, you are that. Tattvamasi, right?
Yes.
You are already that, but you're on this search, but you already have it. It's like you're searching everywhere for your wallet and you forgot it was in your back pocket. We've all done that, right? We're searching for something and we don't look in the most obvious place. How many times do we all do that? And that's what happens on the spiritual path. We're searching for the undifferentiated consciousness that we truly are, the Atman, which is Brahman, but we're looking outside for it. We're looking
everywhere else, but
here. And so, in reality, Hatha Yoga, Tai Chi Chuan, Zazen, any meditation practice that you can mention is about reorienting our focus back within. But then, like you said before, we can often get just attracted to just the practice and the development in that practice without actually looking in our pocket for moksha. It's just here. Like you are looking, it becomes then something your spiritual path is then just about your spiritual practice.
Yes.
And that's where I think a lot of people miss the point.
Yes.
And especially a lot of Westerners, they really miss the point because they think that you get brownie points for the amount of time you sit on your meditation cushion or the amount of hours you've done at Hatha Yoga, so forth and so on.
Yeah.
But if you read especially if you read the Avadutta Gita, one of my favorite texts ever, then it's just about none of that ever mattered from the perspective of the Atman.
Exactly.
You were never born, you never died, you never were on a search.
Yes. You're that.
You're that. The jiva was always Shiva, but you thought it was this isolated, separate thing from the rest of the world that you sold all your shares on. You put all your money on, I should say.
Yeah, the very first step we need to all take is that the idea of jiva has to be dropped.
Yep.
Meaning, again, the idea of exchange, very business-minded these days we all are.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned, we did this amount of practice on zazen or hatha yoga and this and that, so that I should be more advanced now and this and that. It doesn't necessarily work like that. No. Or it doesn't work like that.
No.
Because that's just misunderstanding what the true spiritual path is, really. Again, dropping that idea of you're gonna achieve something. I did this much, so I'm gonna gain this much. It doesn't really work like that. Just like innocence, I think we all had that infant's innocence when we were born, right? So over time we get education, socialization, conditioning, and this and that. So a bit of a dirt comes to our heart, and we change our attitude towards the world or towards the people around you. You change your personality in this and that. But that doesn't mean that you're not innocent anymore. Innocence has always been there, but it's just been covered up with full of dust. But it's all about reopening it. You need to clean all that stuff away, so that you truly find that innocence that you already had it.
We're brought up in a world where that innocence is kind of looked down upon, right? Like everyone thinks, oh no, that innocence makes you weak. Humility makes you weak. But we know that's all false. Yeah. In having that childlike innocence that we always, as you said, we always still have, is something we should lean into.
Exactly.
Really something we should lean into.
Why do we all love to see puppies?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Because the innocence, the playfulness.
In the eyes and everything.
In the eyes. But just everything is new.
Yeah.
Just up for everything, right? Just jumping around, running around. And we all have it. Yeah. But we just kind of forgotten at the moment and just covered with too many things that we've gone through for years of our life. But it never goes away. That's the thing. And
the sage has that innocence in the eyes, right? And that's why people are attracted to it. That's why Alan Watts recommended everyone get a picture of Ramana Maharishi, right? And he said he would look at that every day before he would go outside. He'd just stare at Ramana and the childlike innocence in Ramana's eyes. Hence, we have a picture here.
Yes.
And one of the problems is with, as Buddha mentioned, with seeking, is we live in a world which is linear oriented, right? So it's guided in time. And so we all must, in some sense, according to socialization, we need to earn it.
Yes.
And this is what really frustrates a lot of people, especially in the Taoist community and the yoga community, when you mention about Ramana Maharishi. They look at someone like Ramana Maharishi, right? And they go, he didn't earn it. He was 16 and what? He's enlightened, that's it? He didn't do any yoga, didn't do any Tai Chi Chuan, he didn't do anything? He needs to earn it. And it's like, no, he doesn't. He gave up the search.
Yes.
That's how he earned it, so to speak.
But the stopping search, dropping the sense of I with a small s, is, I think, the most difficult thing for everyone to do. That's why we find it actually a lot of people are not so interested in Vedanta as much as Taoism, for
yeah.
example, because we know that Taoism is a softer approach and more ascetic, more poetic, artistic, like this. But Vedanta is just kind of everything stripped off. You're naked.
Butt naked.
You're butt naked. Straight in, otherwise you're not going to get it.
Yeah.
Well, that's why I think people might find it a bit frightening when they encounter Vedanta. But again, that's how he earned it, like you said. He dropped it. He just left home at age 16, and that was it.
Yep. And the whole metaphysics of that is that Atman is not time-bound. The undifferentiated consciousness is not time-bound. It's non-linear.
Yeah.
It's outside the scope of time. And so Ramana represents that who has dropped time, dropped this linear concept of Venkataraman, which was his Venkataraman Iyer, which was his birth name, right? So he dropped this idea of Venkataraman and became, well, other people named him Ramana Maharishi, right?
Great seer.
The great seer. So he dropped the idea of this time-bound jiva to realize Shiva, which is.
That's why he still lives on, actually.
Of course, yeah.
Because he actually, I think, overcame that idea of death and birth, and that's why he still lives on.
That's why he still lives on, yeah. And that's why his teachings are even becoming, in some sense, more popular in this day and age, when people are seeking reprieve from the absolute nonsense that the world has become. And so what we do learn from Ramana is how to step outside of this linear, time-bound reality that the soul lives in to actually experience Brahman. You are Atman, which is Brahman, right? And so we don't need to earn it and to achieve it. We've got to get out of that sort of like that business-like oriented mindset where we need to like suck it up and do our chin-ups, and that's how we earn it.
Gotta do the hard work to gain.
Yeah. You know, there's a lot of these...
No pain, no gain.
No pain, no gain. There's a lot of these motivational speakers now that talk about like you've got to really suck it up and you got to suffer to earn things. You know, there's this whole movement going on.
It's got to be painful.
Yeah. Where Ramana is just shaking his head like,
stop it.
Abhaya mudra.
Right now.
Abhaya mudra.
Stop it.
So that's the nature of reality, isn't it? And like you said, it's easier said than done, right? Easier said than done. But that's actually all of our spiritual practice. Doesn't matter whether you're Hindu, Taoist, Buddhist, Jain. That's your spiritual practice, is to realize the undifferentiated consciousness.
Yes.
And in a place like India, used to be like this in China too, back a while, but they celebrate those individuals who are not individuals anymore, because they become an aperture for the
Brahman.
Or the Tao to express itself.
Tao, yeah.
And that's why the whole tradition of satsang and all of that came about, because it's almost like the words are coming from a deeper place.
Yes.
You know, and so that's why satsang means, it's a Sanskrit word, but it means to sit in truth, to listen to the teacher who's actually giving you the straight dope.
Yeah, again, like you mentioned, it's not an easy journey. There's going to be a lot of hard times sometimes, and it's not happy, shiny, and sort of moments going through this rigorous sadhana, but the work has to be done. There is no otherwise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There is no other way, is there? So, we pretty much covered that. So, guys, we hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you next time.